This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to M237, back to another review. As I come to the end of my run through of films based on real life serial killers, this is not the last film I have, but we're getting towards the end. But this is one that I've had pretty much the whole time I've been doing this run. This is one I picked up early on. It's one I have seen. It's one I used to own. I used to have it on Blu-ray maybe 5-6 years ago. But I don't know if this was one that got stolen, lost, or whatever happened to it, so I had to buy it again. But I was able to find it really cheap. I haven't seen it since. I've only seen it once. And I remember not liking it the first time I saw it because it's not really based on the life of this killer. It takes place during the escape of the final victim and then the investigation. And I don't think I really appreciated that the first time I saw it. I was probably one of those surface level people that it doesn't even show the kills or anything like that. It barely shows anything. I still do wish there was a movie, even if it was this accurate, because this is a fairly accurate film. There are a lot of fictionalized parts. This is a Hollywood film. It has some big actors in it. I think this was maybe not a wide release, but a wider release than most other ones. But I really come to appreciate it now. And I do wish there was a film really based on the life of this killer, because as I've said before, for lack of a better term, this killer would be in my top 5 as most fascinating to read about or favorites to read about, watch about. I'd probably put him as number 4 in my top 5 favorites. That is Alaskan serial killer Robert Hansen in the 2013 film Frozen Ground, with John Cusack playing Hansen and Nicolas Cage playing State Trooper Jack Holcomb, based on the Sergeant Glenn Floth, however you pronounce it. It kind of feels like a David Lynch film. It feels like it wants to be a David Lynch film, but without having the intensity or the atmosphere or the grim flair that Fincher has. But it's still a well-shot, well-made film. So yeah, this really focuses more on the escape of his would-be final victim, Cindy Paulson, and the investigation that led to his capture. Sort of building on the rapport between the sergeant and the escapee Paulson. It is a little exaggerated than what happened in real life. Now, as I've said, watching it this time, I do really appreciate it. There are a lot of really factual things that happen. It is more factual than some other films that I've done. Not as factual as some others, of course. Now, I have seen some other things that do feel more Robert Hansen. There aren't really other films about him, like where the character's name is Robert Hansen. There's a film called Naked Prey from 2007. Really just about a guy that hunts women. That's his MO, but it takes place in New Mexico. And actually, the main antagonist of Dexter New Blood, Robert Hansen, inspired the Kurt Caldwell character. Which, again, very different in the same way Trinity is very different from BTK. But that makes Hansen and BTK are really the only killers that Dexter modeled a main antagonist after. I'm sure some people will say, well, there was that one guy in season 8 that was a cannibal. In my opinion, he was inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer. Why? Just because he's a cannibal? That needs a little more than that. And Kurt Caldwell is actually probably my second favorite antagonist after Trinity. Very well written, very complex, very layered. Also, there's a film that I reviewed called Alone, which I don't think is really inspired by Hansen, but the way the film plays out, if you know the Hansen story, it will definitely make you think about him. So there's not really too much about Hansen. Uh, they do fictionalize a scenario. There is this one character that I think is just supposed to embody the victim profile that he goes after, because it takes place after Cindy Paulson's escape. I think she's just a fictional character that sort of represents the kind of woman that he would go after. And it does show him, shows what he does. Takes her to his home, keeps her captive, assaults her, then flies her out to the wilderness, gives her a head start, then hunts her like wild game. Which there's not really any other serial killer that really has an MO like that. I find it very fascinating, very frightening at the same time. He was one of those kind of BTK, John Wayne Gacy sort of pillars of the community that everyone respected. So it doesn't go too much into Hansen's life, and I can see why surface level people now will dislike this film for that reason. But it's coming at it from a different angle. As long as it's factual and there are stuff that you can factually take away from it, then I'm all for it. Now, yes, I do wish that there was a film actually based on Hansen and sort of followed his life. Even if it was, I think this is a well-made film. If it was done like this, that would work. Now, I used to think John Cusack was not a good cast for Hansen. Watching it this time, I thought he worked just fine. Now, I know I'm going to piss off the whole internet by saying I'm really not a Cage fan. I've never really been a Nicolas Cage fan. I grew up with Raising Arizona. I can watch Willy's Wonderland as sort of ironically, like, yeah, it's stupid, but it's entertaining. I really liked him in Pig. And I thought he did alright in this. Other than that, I'm not a big Cage fan. Other than that, I mean, the cast works well. There's plenty of familiar faces. It was directed by Scott Walker. It was actually produced. One of the producers was credited as Curtis Jackson. And that's because 50 Cent actually does have a bit role in this. And even he does a good job in the short scenes that he's in. Vanessa Hudgens plays Cindy Paulson. She does all right. I do know that Hudgens actually worked closely with Paulson, or at least had some kind of a rapport with her. I feel like the movie kind of dampens her down to a damsel in distress rather than from what I've read, she was kind of a headstrong, willing to help out, of anything to catch this guy kind of, escaped person trying to make it better. This shows her as a troubled, can't stay away from prostitution, can't keep herself safe. It does fictionalize subplots about Hansen trying to track her down even after the fact, or hiring a guy to kill her. So she's kind of this damsel in distress throughout the film. Patrick Margulia did the cinematography. Lauren Balfe did the music. And there were parts of the music that reminded me of some of the music in Mindhunter, which David Fincher directed the first handful of episodes. It has, that's a very Fincher-esque production. This kind of feels like a Fincher film, like a lesser Fincher film. That music kind of helped to add to it. And released in the U.S. August 23rd, 2013. Actually, almost a year to the day that Robert Hansen would pass away. I do know that this film, it was shot in 26 days entirely in Alaska, but within those 26 days, the director shut down for 5 months so he could wait for the winter, because I guess he wanted the time to look more natural, and he wanted, he really wanted the winter to really kind of take over and really show how everything's coming to a head as winter's rolling in. It really help. It does help the atmosphere. Uh, the cast said it was brutal. It would get to -0. Alaska's very cold. I mean, I live here in Maine, so I can imagine how cold this was. For the most part, everyone kind of keeps their real names, save for the Floth family, which, Cage plays Jack Halcombe. Radha Mitchell plays Allie Holcomb. They're based on Glenn and Cherry Floth. I'm just going to call them Floth. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce them. But, it doesn't say it under here. Maybe she's not even credited. Yeah. I'm guessing she wanted nothing to do with it, but Robert's wife is credited as Fran Hansen, played by Catherine Lanassa. Her real name was Darla, so I mean, maybe she wanted nothing to do with it. Oh, it played in select theaters and then went directly to a video on demand, so it wasn't really a wide release, I guess. But yeah, people cited Cage's performance as a highlight, which I will say, not being a Cage fan, he did do a good job. He's not as, no pun intended, cagey as he gets in other films. But, would I have liked to see a film about this troubled guy who abducts prostitutes, holds them captive, and then has this heart-pounding, intense hunt through the woods as he tracks them like animals? Yeah, that would have been a great horror movie and a really intense true crime film had they gone that route. But, and I'm sure people are going to come up with these theories that don't make sense, like, oh yeah, Lionsgate pussed out and they didn't want to show, stuff like that. Lionsgate puts out a lot of gory stuff. Lionsgate isn't really afraid to do stuff. It's just that's not the angle that they're going for. The movie's about the investigation and how this escapee and this sergeant teamed up to catch the state's most notorious and most prolific serial killer. People will come up with theories for why a movie doesn't show certain things, and it's always someone pussed out, or people will complain that it's too offensive, when objectively it's just because it's coming from a different angle. It's not the life story of Robert Hansen. Would I like to see that movie? Yes. We do get at least one victim, one scene of, him abducting her, him keeping her at his house, and then him chasing her through the woods. We do get one scene just so it establishes his MO, which to me, that's perfectly fair, because it is about the investigation. Now, I think the reason why I waited so long to review this is because even though Hansen has always been in my top 5 favorites, if I could say that, I haven't really had I haven't had much on him specifically. Of course, there's the 24 or whatever encyclopedias. There's the numerous documentaries that I have. There's the numerous, true crime magazines that I have. Excuse me, but I haven't really had anything specifically on him. I ordered this a while ago, and I was actually debating, and I didn't know how these books were, debating on this book by Jack Smith or the one by Walter Gilmore, both called The Butcher Baker. I ended up ordering the one by Jack Smith. It took a while to come in. I wanted to read it first. I've been getting a lot of these serial killer books that are more kind of like short or long, a bullet point presentations. I wish I got the Walter Gilmore book, but this is still very informative. Of course, The Butcher Baker would be his moniker after his arrest. But, this movie, it's very well shot. It looks great. It does have good atmosphere. I wouldn't say it's as strong in intensity, suspense, atmosphere, or even this sort of grim, dark, moody, cinematic look that a David Fincher film has. But it's close. It's still passable. If he were to come out and say I was going for a David Fincher look, I could see that, and I would commend him for being kind of close. There's not one bad actor. I mean, I would say Vanessa Hudgens isn't the best. I wouldn't, single her out for praise. Not that she was terrible, but she was kind of limited to a damsel in distress, as I said. I do think that Cusack this time around was better. He has the same glasses. He has the same kind of demeanor. He's kind of meek, submissive, but very quick to anger. He said it was said that he had a very infantile personality. Um, he Hansen was known to stutter, especially in childhood. Cusack does do that a bit, but not to the point where he's like Bill Denborough from It. It's more like you can tell he's struggling to get things out, and maybe he'll change a word or whatever. But I definitely can buy him as Robert Hansen. Would I have picked him if I were to make the film? Would I have picked him just off the bat? Probably not. But seeing what he did with the film, he works. One thing I will commend it for is it pays very close attention to certain details. I mean, I'm gonna put some photos up, but the interior design of Hansen's house. Now, I would not be surprised if they shot this at his house. I don't think they did. I imagine his house does not look the same after all this time. But it looks very similar. I mean, almost to like a Mindhunter level of attention to detail. Even the placement of all the animal heads in his room, or where the TV is, or the pool table, the angle of the pool table to the post that he would chain the prostitutes to. It looks very close to this. So I really commend him for that kind of detail. It does have its suspenseful moments. It does have its, even if you know the story, you know how it's going to turn out. But, it I can see what they're going for with the suspense. I do like the timing of certain scenes, like how they timed and edited the initial questioning of Robert Hansen, along with the seemingly fruitless search of his house, where they can't find anything because he hid it so well. And just the escalation of the questioning and the escalation of the search of his house. I really liked that juxtaposition and that editing. I didn't even really mind the really fabricated stuff, such as, sort of the level of the relationship that they portray between these two, or the subplot of Hansen trying to go after her after the fact, or trying to hire a guy to kill her. I don't know if she became a topless dancer after the fact. I know she kept going back to prostitution, but there really isn't much known about her other than her involvement with Hansen. So it gave him a bit of wiggle room to play with, I guess. It worked to the film's favor. I mean, it made it did make it a bit more intense. It did make it a bit more suspenseful. Where they are coming at it at an angle of the investigation, I think they are able to do that. But all the victims' names are the same, very tiny details. I mean, Hansen's trophy of choice was pieces of jewelry, one piece they mention is like a golden arrowhead necklace, where he hid everything in his house before the search. Where the firearms were hidden in a hidden space in the attic, like a trapdoor in the attic. But the aviation map with all the X's was hidden behind his headboard. In certain pieces of jewelry, like the arrowhead necklace found with the firearms, and the certain kinds of firearms that were found. Very close attention to detail. The scenes when they have all the firearms they did find that aren't linked to the murders, the way those are all laid out, looks very much like the photos that I've seen. They don't mention him by name, but they do essentially read off John Douglas's profile of Hansen. John Douglas was the one that profiled Hansen during the time of the investigation. They kind of make it look like Cage profiled him, which I don't know why a state trooper sergeant would be able to profile a serial killer. But everything that he reads off is almost verbatim what John Douglas put in Hansen's profile. So even though it does fictionalize good chunks of the film, the stuff it does tell truthfully, it pays very close attention to the detail. So I really appreciate that. And again, I know people are going to be mad because it doesn't follow Robert Hansen. Because it doesn't show all of his murders in the most graphic detail possible, that they weren't disturbed because it wasn't as graphic as August Underground Mortem, because they've seen that, so they think every serial killer film, even real life ones, have to be that graphic. And again, I'll say this every time, that's why we call them surface level true crime fans. A real true crime enthusiast would be like, oh, Robert Hansen, oh, they're coming at it at the angle for the investigation. Cool, let's check that out. Oh, someone says it's similar to like a David Fincher film. Awesome, I bet it's going to be really good. And it is. It's well made. I love the way it's shot. It looks good. It sounds good. It's well acted. They don't go too far with the stuff they fictionalize or that they fabricate. The stuff they do show of Hansen, especially the dual, again, it doesn't delve too much into things. It tries to show the dual life, respected member of the community, owning a bakery, being a devoutly religious family man, and then this sadistic rapist, that kidnapper rapist that would hunt women like wild game. It shows just enough. It shows just enough to know what this guy is about, and really get the idea of why this guy is so driven to catch him. So that's the movie, or my thoughts on it. So now I guess we'll get into the cliff notes and then the comparison of the film to real life. So as always, I just like to give a quick brief cliff notes or summary of the real life killer. So Robert Hansen was born February 15th, 1939. It was Alaska's most notorious and most prolific serial killer. It was dubbed the Butcher Baker after his capture. Though he has killed at least 17 women and possibly up to 21 between 1971 and June of 1983, he was only convicted of 4 murders, with the bulk of them being between 1980 and 83. It is also said that he raped at least 31 additional women. He was known as being a well-respected member of the community in or around Anchorage, Alaska. He owned a bakery. He was a devout churchgoer with his family, his wife, and 2 children. He was also a skilled master hunter, receiving many awards for marksmanship and hunting, and having many taxidermy trophies. This ties into Hansen's MO, as he would abduct young women, mostly prostitutes, sometimes under the pretense of paying for a photo shoot. First, he would take them to his home while his family was away, hold them captive, rape and torture them, then take them by plane, his own personal plane, to the vast wilderness of Alaska, strip them down, and give them a head start, which he would then track, hunt, and kill them like wild game. Then he would dress them up, supposedly to look like a lost hunter, and take a piece of jewelry as a trophy. On June 13th of 83, his would-be final victim, 17-year-old prostitute Cindy Paulson, was able to escape as he attempted to get her in his plane. She was able to describe his plane, and an airfield security guard got his car plate and plane numbers. And despite having two friends give an untrue alibi, one did come forth after hearing what he was questioned for. After a search warrant found many firearms, including the ones matching the casings found at the scenes, jewelry trophies, and an aviation map with X's on them, Hansen was arrested. After a plea for his confession, he was convicted of 4 of the 17 confirmed murders, sentenced to 461 years in 1984, and on April 21st, 2014, he died at the age of 75. And so now we come to the film itself, which, again, Sergeant Jack Halcombe, I read he's based on a few different people, but he's mainly based on Sergeant or State Trooper Glenn Floth. Well, it doesn't say any years, so some of these you kind of have to. Some of these I kind of had to guess who they were talking about, victim-wise, sort of by like the math of what they're saying. Like, oh, she's been missing for 2 years at this point. You kind of had to guess who they're talking about, but I was able to make sense of it. And there's no years or months, but it's 1983, and Cindy Paulson is found in a hotel after escaping Robert Hansen. True, June 13th of 83, she escaped from Hansen as he tried to get her into his plane at the airfield. She managed to get away to a truck driver. He dropped her off at the hotel her boyfriend was staying at. And then the boyfriend in the front desk called the police. They came and got her with her handcuffs still on that Hansen put on her, as the film depicts. 2 police talking to each other mention she got away as the suspect was taking her to his plane. She knew his name. They looked into him, and 2 friends said that he was with them. True. He did have 2 friends give an untrue alibi, like, oh yeah, he was with me. I guess he told them that he was questioned for something, but his family was gone. There was no one to back him up. And since everyone in the community respected him, and they knew him for so many years, they were happy to lie for him. Now, the movie does not show either or both friends coming forward and being like, hey, I lied. If he's being questioned for murder, you should probably look into him. But yeah, I lied. The film doesn't go into that. During questioning, Cindy says she was raped once and chained to a bed on the floor. True, she was chained around the neck to a post in the basement. They say basement, but it was like fully furnished. And again, it looks just like Hansen's real house. He did assault her once, and then he took a nap on the couch right beside her. And then when he woke up, he took her to his plane. Apparently, it was like a 5-hour ordeal that she spent at his house. We're introduced to Allie Halcombe, again inspired by Cherry Floth, his wife. There's a body found, and it's linked to the other missing cases where women or prostitutes believed that they were going to photo shoots. True. He didn't do that for all of them, but there were some where he said he was a photographer and you want to make some money for a photo shoot. Hansen believed to be an upstanding, respected citizen. True, despite previous run-ins, he did have a meek personality and demeanor, and he was the local baker. Everyone liked him. There's sort of a press conference, and someone brings up a victim named Sherry Graves or Sherry Morrow. being missing since November of '82, believing she was going to a photo shoot. True, and her name was Sherry Morrow. Though she went missing in November of '81 and was found September of '82, and she was dressed like how she was found, which implied Hansen dressed after her. I don't know what I was trying to say there. To look like the previous one that they found. Uh, then someone mentions the name Eklutna Annie because there was this Jane Doe found by the Eklutna River. So they just called her Eklutna Annie. She still has not been identified. Apparently, since 2013, when this came out, there have been new developments in the Hansen case, other than him dying, which I'll say towards the end what that was. I could only find one development, but apparently, not including Annie, but there was another unidentified Jane Doe that they were able to finally ID. So someone mentions including Annie as a Jane Doe that went missing last year. So she did go missing. Including Annie did go missing the year prior to Sherry Morrow in 1980, but the film's timeline would put that at 81. So the movie seems to be a year ahead of everything, or the real timeline is kind of a year behind. I kind of frigged my own notes up, so if that sounded confusing, I apologize. So then we're introduced to this character of Debbie Peters, who's a young prostitute. Now, she's a fictional character. She's the one that's supposed to kind of be the representation of the victim profile, or all the women before Cindy Paulson. She's the only one that we see, be abducted, being taken to his house, being assaulted. Well, we don't really see her being assaulted, but it's implied. Then being taken to his plane, flown out to the wilderness, and then, he lets her go and to be hunted. She's the only one that we see that happened to, but I think, and again, he never did, try to abduct anyone else after Paulson. He laid pretty low because he would be arrested that October. So I think it was just the film's way of showing, okay, this is what this guy's all about. We see Hansen shown as a baker, owning his own bakery, as his father was back in Ohio, which is where he's from. He actually does mention being born in not Ohio, Iowa. Halcombe goes over Hansen's file, says he picked up a girl in 71, drove her to the Kenai Lake or Kenai River, whichever one he said, at gunpoint and raped her, got 5 years, served 3 months. He was picked up twice in real life in 1971, attempting to rape a housewife and then the rape of a prostitute. And as part of a plea bargain, the charge against the prostitute was dropped, and he pled no contest to the assault with a deadly weapon on the housewife. He was sentenced to 5 years, but he served 6 months instead of 3. And then just more of his history. There was larceny in 76, but Cage only mentions 71. His first victim was also 1971. And I think this is the only scene with this character that Cage is talking to. I don't know the actor's name, but he played Ray Speltzer in season 7 of Dexter. The one with those bullhorn helmet that his house was like a maze that he chased women through. Says 8 girls have gone missing in the last 2 years. Again, in going through this, it does get confusing because they put the timeline of the ones they found and then all the ones that were linked to him after the fact. So actually trying to put them in chronological order, the order can be messed up. But what I counted was actually 7, including Cindy. And he says that Cindy was 23, offered her $200 for oral sex, then raped her at gunpoint. Now, she was actually 17, and the movie does address this later. She did tell cops she was 23. And the assault was at home, but he did pull a gun on her. The sister of a victim gives a file of dental records to Halcombe, mentions she's been missing for 2 years, and calls her Susie. Now, I'm guessing that has to be Sue Luna, which, according to my count, again with the frigged up timeline, I think she was victim number 10. She went missing May 26th of 82, not found till April 24th of 84. So the timeline adds up in the film. Sister calls her Susie, and she was the one that reported her missing. I don't know if that meeting between the two ever happened in real life, but the facts that she says do go with Sue Luna. Also, I noticed at the end, because during the end text it says he was only convicted of 4 murders, and they say the 4 names. And so I noticed all 4 names are in my notes as far as victims being referenced. So I'm guessing all the ones that they talk about specifically and name are the ones that he was convicted of. So all the ones that I guess you could say were his victims, but what ones that he was not convicted of, like, how do I want to word this? I'm getting ahead of myself. So, like, when they're having a conversation, like, oh, she's been missing since this time, or, oh, this victim was found in this month, you can probably guess it's going to be Sue Luna or Joanna Messalina. Joanna Messina, excuse me, because they only mentioned 4 victims by name, or 3 and including Annie. So whichever ones they're talking about, it's going to be one of those 4. So that actually made it a lot easier to take notes and see what they were talking about. So then it shows Hanson with Debbie at his home in his basement, and this is when you really get to see the layout of his house and how it looks like the real life thing. Very rustic with like the 70s wood paneling, all the animal heads on the wall, seemingly in the same formation. There's even one that kind of looks like a walrus, like with the tusks. And just organized to look exactly like the way his TV is, where the pool table, the post, the floor tile. They did a very good job on that. Mentions other girls found, but dead, including Joanna Messina. A young nurse shot, found eaten by a black bear. That's what the film says. That was true. She wasn't eaten, but she was gnawed at, and they had to shoo it away. The film says that they shot at it, but the black bear was or is a protected species, so they had to shoo it. She was a topless dancer, and sources vary on whether she was a nurse. And she went missing in July of 1980 and was found that same month. The movie says they got the guy, but he passed the polygraph and there was no conviction. In real life, they did have a suspect, but he failed the polygraph, but there was still no conviction. There's another body found, possibly Paula Goulding, victim 16 or 17. I put some dates are unknown, which, yeah. Says shot once and multiple lacerations to neck and ribs. Looks like possible attempted decapitation. And had been there at least all summer. Now, she was found September 2nd of 83, near where other bodies were found, but she was shot multiple times in the back with a .223 caliber rifle and then redressed, and had been missing since April 24th. So by this time, we're probably into September. So if she's been there the summer, that would be Paula Goulding, and that was one of the 4 that he was convicted of. She was Sydney smoking meth and becoming a dancer. She was a drug addict, but everything I've read, She had been trying to stay clean and get her life in order. I do know she kept falling back into prostitution. She was put into a safe house, uh, which I'll get to, because the film tries to make it look like she was living with Halcombe and his wife for a while, but they put her in a safe house. Hansen takes the girl to his plane, flies her to the area, cuffs her to a tree, then he lets her go, he lets her run, and then he just shoots her. It's a very quick scene. I would have preferred if it showed him, kind of looking at broken branches or looking at footprints or touching the ground, trying to feel vibrations, doing some kind of tracker stuff. But it really just kind of shows him walking through the woods and then shooting her. It's very quick. But it's still done in a tense way, despite how short the scene is. Come on. But he does not strip her then redress her as he did with others in the film or in real life, or as people in the film say that's how they found them. But he does take a necklace, which was his trophy of choice. Cindy sees Hansen at the strip club she now dances at. False. I don't think they ever saw each other until she testified. From here on out, all the stuff dealing with her and Hansen is pretty fictionalized. It depicts Cindy trying to flee Alaska to save herself, but Halcombe convinces her to stay to help him build a case against Hansen. In real life, he put her up in a safe house, not the house with his wife and daughter, but she kept going back to prostitution. But the day of Hansen's conviction, Floth and his wife put Cindy and her friend on a plane, and they left Alaska to do more prostitution somewhere else. Hansen showed with his wife and 2 kids saying grace before dinner. They were known to be a very religious family, and he did have 2 kids. Again, her name was Darla, but she's Fran in the film. Close calls at the club, like Hansen going back, Cindy's ODing in the bathroom. Hansen goes in the bathroom to get her, but someone catches him. Halcombe is there looking for Cindy, and they all almost catch each other. Pretty sure that never happened. Hansen hiring a guy to kill Cindy for him. False. Hansen starting to clean out all incriminating evidence, including jewelry trophies, weapons with the same caliber. True. Now, he does take his son to his plane, saying like, "Oh, we got to check our hunting equipment," where he takes his bag of trophies and hides them. The film says that because of the X's on the map that they would find, they were able to find his bag of trophies. In real life, I think he hid everything in his house, so they didn't have to do. I could be wrong on that. That's probably the one thing I'm not quite sure about. But he figured something was going to happen, so he did go through and hide everything. When requesting a search warrant for his work, plane, car, and home, Halcombe sums up how Hansen fits the profile. All things he mentions of which were actually written by the John Douglas, Mindhunter John Douglas. He was one that came up with the original profile. Such as white male, early 40s, average height, possibly married, respected member of the community, probably very religious, not totally aware of what he's doing, history of theft, sexual assault, and then there's emphasis on, and probably stutters, which that was one of the big things about Hansen's life. That people think that was one of the biggest things for why he lashed out, was he had this severe stuttering problem even through adulthood. But it made it almost impossible for him to talk when he was a kid. But then says expert outdoorsman and or avid hunter. All those traits were in Douglas's original profile. And of all the suspects they had or that they were possibly looking at, Hansen was the only one that checked every box. Difficulty getting a warrant. I don't know if it was that difficult. I mean, it was granted and conducted, and they got an arrest by October, uh, because whoever it is, the judge or whoever that signs the warrant, he keeps saying that everything is circumstantial. Now, I did read somewhere that Cindy left her shoes on the passenger floor of his car. It never shows that. But they are able to get the search warrant. Hansen told to go down to the station while he's at work, and he complies, with no fuss. That was true. And the search goes on at the same time as his questioning. They're trying to get him for insurance fraud, which is true. Something to do with trophies that he stole. So they're trying to get him for insurance fraud, just to have something that sticks until they find the evidence they need. So, and that is what happened. During the questioning, they mentioned the rape of one woman in '71, and how she told them he took her ID and wrote her and her family's address down on a piece of paper. That way, if you say anything, I will go after your family. And of course, which is true, he did do that in '71. And then finally, she did step up and come forward, and then that's why he was arrested in '71. He does say that he solicited prostitutes because he wanted oral sex, but that was something he couldn't ask his wife for. That was something Hansen was known to say. Search of his house proves to be difficult, as nothing incriminating can be found, though they did find 17 firearms, none of which matched the caliber used in the murders. That is true. In fact, there's a scene where they're even laid out, like the photos that you'll see in whatever books about him. So they couldn't find anything, but he was also a felon and not supposed to have weapons. The film doesn't address that. Halcombe arrests him during the questioning for murder, even though they haven't found the evidence yet. He was arrested, but originally it was for insurance fraud. They find the hidden attic space, where they find a Mini 14 Thompson Contender, both of which are .223 calibers, which in the hidden attic space, they did find a Remington 5.52 rifle, 22 caliber, Thompson Contender, 7mm single-shot pistol, an aviation map with marks on it, some jewelry, including a gold arrowhead necklace, a few newspaper clippings, a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun, and the .223 caliber a Mini 14. So they kind of truncated everything they found. And it does show them with the map, but later on, they also bring forth this map that they say they found behind his headboard in the bedroom, which is the one with all the marks on it. So, I mean, still pretty accurate. Map found behind his bed with all the X's on it where the bodies were found. True, he later used it to help identify the girls that were missing, or some of them at least, because I think it had 37 marks on it, but he could only lead them to 17 successfully. Sidney walks in as the questioning gets heated, and he slips up and threatens he should have killed her when he had the chance, pretty much confessing. I don't think that's how that happened. So then the end text says Robert Hansen confessed to the murder of 17 women and the rape of 30 more. Authorities believe there may be more. Some cases are still open. True. In fact, because I did see that some developments have come out since the release of this film. One of which was, after 37 years, there was a Jane Doe named Horseshoe Harriet that they were unable to identify. But then, 37 years later, some ID testing came through, and they were able to ID her as Robin Pelkey, who was first discovered on April 25th of '84. Also says in return for his confession, he was only charged with the abduction and rape of Sidney Paulson and the murders of Joanna Messina, Sherry Morrow, Paula Goulding, and including Annie. True. He was only convicted of 4 murders, also sentenced, then it says, sentenced to 461 years, never eligible for parole. True. He led authorities to 17 grave sites, only 11 bodies were recovered. True, he did lead them to 17 grave sites, but they actually exhumed 12 bodies. Halcombe remained with the state troopers and was promoted to commander of Crime Investigation Bureau. I believe that to be true. I haven't seen anything otherwise. And Cindy now lives in the lower 48 states with a husband and 3 kids. This is the first time telling her story. I believe that to be true because there's not much known about her. And, anytime you look up Sidney Paulson, it always just has to do with her escape and how she helped with the investigation. And I do know that she helped Hudgens. And I read some quote about how when this came out, it was like a weight lifted off her shoulders. But that's Frozen Ground. So I would say, Robert Hansen being as far as a top 5 favorite, most fascinating, most interesting serial killer. Again, I've been super passionate about serial killers, the topic of serial killers for almost 20 years at this point, and he's always been in my top 5. I think always at number 4, been my number 4 favorite. So I would say this is a good film about the case of Robert Hansen, I should say. There definitely is a lot of stuff that you can take away from this. I do feel like if all you know is he's this guy that takes women into the woods and hunts them, if that's all you know, there is a lot to learn from this. I mean, if you take out the whole thing of him going after her after the abduction, hiring someone to kill her, stuff like that, and then that whole subplot, there actually is a lot to learn. And, is it a Robert Hansen movie? No. Like, we don't see him as a kid. We don't see his upbringing. We don't see his arson crimes in the early 60s. We don't see him getting into killing, starting out. We don't see him forming his MO and stuff like that. Would I like to see that film? Yes. Would I like to see a Robert Hansen film done like this, or that looks like this, or like that film Alone that I reviewed? Sure, I would love to see a Robert Hansen film. But, I could say for how fascinated I've always been by Hansen, I would say this is a well-made, still plenty to learn from the film based on the story of him, or at least the end, the aftermath, the investigation. So, definitely a good movie. I don't know if I'd say it's one of my favorites, but I definitely come to appreciate this a lot more than I did the first time I saw it 5-6 years ago. I know there's going to be a lot of surface level people that are going to hate it because it doesn't show, other than that one girl, and who isn't a factual girl, she's more of a representation character, that not only it just shows one, but it doesn't go into the most graphic of details, because to them that's what a serial killer movie should be. It should be just a graphic Rob Zombie movie, which that just goes to show how much those people really care about true crime. And so no, definitely plenty to take away from this film. And if you're a fan of David Fincher and his look and style, it's not quite up to David Fincher, but you can definitely get that feeling from it. It definitely has the feel, atmosphere, intensity of a lesser David Fincher film. Well acted. If you're a Cage fan, definitely check it out. I would say this is one of his better performances. And if you want to see John Cusack be creepy, check that out too, because he does a good job as well. So that is the Robert Hansen the investigation of the Butcher Baker film, Frozen Ground. I only have a few serial killer films left, and I think they're the long ones. 3 hour Helter Skelter, 3 or 4 hour Manson Family. There's another Night Stalker film on YouTube I can check out. So we're getting down to the end of it. But stay tuned for those. And I'll probably do a collection video of all my books and everything after Christmas because I'm hoping to get more for Christmas. But, excuse me, and I apologize these videos are so long, but, I really got to talk about the film and compare everything. But anyway, stay tuned for the last few, and thank you for watching.